The top 1% have been all over the media recently complaining that they're being attacked as being greedy and incompetent. So let's go beyond the superficial and look at the mind of the corporation, the mind of the CEO. Joining me now for this discussion is attorney Howard Nations to talk about what sociopathic and psychopathic really means where it comes to America's new corporate America. You know, Howard, when we use the term psychopath and sociopath, we usually don't think of America's business elite as falling into that. But, you know, in the last 2 years, there have been more books and stories written about the fact that if you take these people, these one percenters, these Tom Perkins types, and you are Sam Zell, you know, these billionaires that are complaining about how they're just not being treated fairly, that if you take them and you just go step by step, analyze, are they psychopath, are they sociopath, it is almost a perfect fit. What's your take on all this new literature coming out?
You know, it really is. The opposite ends of the spectrum here are that C. Wright Mills wrote The Sociological Imagination, talking about the relationship between society and individuals. Now, there's a new coined phrase at the other end of the spectrum, which is a sociopathic imagination. And that's the people who see only individuals, no connectivity with others, total lack of empathy or conscience or intuitive social awareness. The exemplar for this is Tom Perkins, a billionaire who wrote an editorial in the Wall Street Journal comparing the attacks on the 1%, believe this, to Nazi attacks on the Jews.
Yeah, you know, Howard, Paul Rosenberg with Alternet, we've had him on the show many times. When I read, everybody should read his story, The Sociopathic 1%.
Right.
What he does is he takes these very points that we're reviewing right now, and he says, how does this affect a business in America? Well, it does have a direct effect on business in America. It does have a direct effect on the relationship between the 1% and the 99% when you have the sociopaths and the psychopaths saying, you know, collectivism, you know, our care for a society as a whole is a huge mistake. We must care for the individual only. Isn't that kind of the bottom line to this?
Yes, it is. And the bottom line is that Ayn Rand, amazingly, an atheist, a Russian-born atheist, has become the philosopher du jour of the right wing and of the Republican Party, too. And, you know, the bad thing about Perkins and Zell, you can look at them, but Paul Krugman, who's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, says that they are not outliers, that paranoia and megalomania are quite pervasive in the 1%. And that what's happening here is that you see that corporate America has moved into this type of sociopathic callousness that we see manifested in such things recently as the legislation by Congress cutting food stamps, cutting off unemployment insurance. And they've adopted Ayn Rand's philosophy, objectivism.
Well, you know what, Howard? When Paul Rosenberg wrote this article, we're talking about the sociopathic 1%. One thing that he did, I thought, was brilliant. He took and he compared the period in America that's between 1973 and 2011 with a period that was referred to as the golden age of capitalism, and that is 1947 through 73. Now, to me, what the stark difference is so startling that Rosenberg comes back and says, listen, for all these Margaret Thatcher types, the Tom Perkins types, the Zell types, the sociopath and psychopathic 1% who are still saying, just believe in us, right, believe in Ayn Rand and everything's going to work out. The comparisons are amazing, aren't they?
They are amazing, and the statistics from that era that you're talking about are so incredibly graphic. In the golden age of capitalism from 47 to 73, the bottom 99% had an increase of 4.1% per year. The top 1% had an increase of only 1.8% per year. The CEOs made 20 to 30 times what the employee made. From 73 through today, the real growth and real income of the 99% has been zero, and the 1% has had a 4.8% growth annually. And CEOs now make from 200 to 350 times what their employees make. Not only that, the CEOs used to rise and fall with the success of the company and with their success of their employees. Now, a CEO can just lead a company into virtually bankruptcy, and they can walk away with tens or hundreds of millions of dollars on their own with the golden parachutes.
You know what's Howard, you know what's so amazing to me is, do you remember the days when everybody used to talk about what a hero Alan Greenspan was?
Yep.
Oh, this brilliant man, just incredible. Well, now first of all, Alan Greenspan actually he was one of the students that Ayn Rand developed. He actually wrote articles for Ayn Rand's newsletter that went out. He said Ayn Rand is the greatest mind in economic history. Now, Ayn Rand, you know the short story on her. She talks about how government's so bad. She was on welfare for about 30% of her life. Ayn Rand was on welfare. Now, at the same time she was on welfare, she was talking about collectivism is terrible for this country. Collectivism is terrible for the world. In other words, collectivism is we take care of each other.
Right.
But the point being, that's what Alan Greenspan bought into. What's your take on this? How did we make Alan Greenspan, who was a terrible, incompetent failure, into this great American hero?
Well, let's look at a second at what he bought into. Ayn Rand's philosophy is objectivism, which is selfishness is a virtue and altruism is a vice. In The Art of Selfishness, she set out the sociopathic sense of morality of its own, but she has a very important quote in there. If civilization is to survive, it's the morality of altruism that men have to reject. So that, and with Greenspan was a very early follower of hers from the 50s. And as you said, he wrote in her famous newsletters. Now, for him to go into government, and obviously if you look carefully at what he did, you see that he had the same total scorn for the ordinary citizen and the middle class that she did. It's absolutely astounding the effect that Ayn Rand has had in being adopted in the American economy today.
Well, and Rosenberg points out also, great, again, I can't say enough things about Paul Rosenberg's article in Alternate. It's just really well done.
Brilliant.
He talks about that Greenspan said we should have no regulations. It should be every man for themselves. It should be corporations can do whatever the hell they want to do, and this becomes a society of look out for yourself, caveat emptor. In other words, be careful, and if you fail, it's your fault. And then along comes Paul Ryan, also a student of Ayn Rand. Tell me about 30 seconds. Talk about Paul Ryan here.
Well, Paul Ryan embraced Rand from the beginning. He had all of his staff members read her books, and he's the Republican budget guru, the vice presidential candidate, and the 2016 presidential hopeful. Ryan, like most Republicans, has a very flexible political philosophy. As soon as it came out that Rand was also an atheist, he started running away from her. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at Atlas Shrugged, it begins with a question, who is John Galt? Now, through Rand and through looking at Greenspan, we know the answer. John Galt is the exemplar for corporate America. He's an exemplar for the libertarians and the right wing. And John Galt is the 1% who destroyed the American economy and now want to rebuild it by shipping jobs overseas and denying benefits to the 99%.
John Galt was the predator that Alan Greenspan and Paul Ryan and the Republican Party has embraced. That's who John Galt is.
Absolutely.
I can't say enough. Read this article if you haven't. Everybody out there, Paul Rosenberg on Alternate, The Sociopathic 1%. Howard, thanks for joining me, okay?
My pleasure, Mike.